it's just a year later that we're seeing this stage back in the same space with the same director who's gone behind. And it's been a pleasure doing this journey together with Alina and Jeremy as well to get this on stage. The Arts House is a place for writers writing in ideas. It's just so important not just to do original Singapore works for us, but to support our writers, our translators, so that works in different languages get a chance to be staged and watched by people who do not understand those languages, as well as adaptation of local literature. So I think without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Fong, who actually is the co-director of the Singapore International Translation Symposium, where the first staging was actually done. And he is also a translator and a teacher himself. So, Dan Fong, take it away.
Hi, thank you all for staying back. I was looking at the time, it's late, it's 10 o'clock. But I don't know how many of you realize how special an occasion this is. Because while Singapore is highly multicultural, I think it's very much lacking in interculturalism. Right? And if you were to look even in stage performances, for example, very seldom do we see translations between the four official local languages. And priority seems to be given to translating foreign works, right? Whether in the Chinese theatre scene, or the English theatre scene, or the other theatre scenes. Right? So tonight, I think it was really very special. And it's also, I think you should feel fortunate that you get to see the works of two of, I've told Siren this, but Mr. Han doesn't know, but they're my idols, right? I told Siren many years ago, because our age closes, I said, when you were in Hwa Chung Junior College and you came up with your first book, we all idolize you so much. So these are really two of the most accomplished writers, working in different genres. And I think a lot of that probably came out just now when you were watching it, right? How vivid the language was, and even Siren is known, Dr. Kwai is known for the beauty of his language, how he uses language. And I think one concern was during the translation, could Jeremy or the translator have kept that? And I think here, but it's different, but I think it's equally beautiful, equally vivid. And I think for Mr. Han's the staging of his play, I think you can see it's a very sophisticated thing. And I think later we might get into it or we might not, but I know both the Chinese scripts and then both of them had different endings from the original. Not different, but slightly adapted or slightly truncated endings, right? Which sort of changed, I think, the whole feel. So that's one of the topics that we could probably get into. And I think the other thing to bear in mind as we go into the discussion is how this thing that doesn't just span language and culture, right? This thing also spans time, because both plays were written 20 over years ago, and I think some of you might not have been born even then. But yeah, as you watch it today, did you get a feeling that this was something written 2 decades ago? Or is it still relevant, and does it still speak to you? Does it still resonate? So resonating across time, resonating across culture, resonating across language. So these are the things that I think would be interesting. I struggled with myself to decide whether or not to start like this, because actually looking at this, would you have known that this was a translation? When you watched it perform, because I really didn't get any sense. I couldn't see any scars of this being originally in another language. And I think that has as much to do with the language as it has to do with the direction and the acting. Right? So again, I think that's one potential topic that we could talk a little bit more about. In a Chinese theatre scene, or if we are from a more China background, we would always honor the guests and ask you all for questions. But today will be a little bit more angmoh, and I will maybe invite the two playwrights, to see if they have any questions or any comments, to ask each other or to talk about their own feelings about their own works. Maybe could I impose on you to just question each other in any language?
Thank you, Dan Fong, for the very flattering words. I'm Siren. I don't know whether you can guess which play was filmed by me. Actually, the first one. Okay, and it's the most courageous of Elena to choose this play of mine to stage it. Among all, I didn't write many plays, but among the few plays I've written, I think this is the most difficult piece of work.
It was very difficult.
And thank you very much, Elena, and the wonderful cast who has done a great job in realizing the imageries in the text, and I love it very much. And for Mr. Han, I don't know whether I should do something ordered by Danfeng to begin a dialogue. Mr. Han is a senior of me. I started watching his plays when I was very young. That was like 3 decades ago. And this is a really wonderful experience to watch his play being translated in English and staged. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Han to share his feeling and view. That will translate it.
我非常高兴今天能够看到我的剧本啊，第一次用英语呈现，非常高兴，非常感谢各位。20年前啊，这个戏是1995年啊，我写了，有在那个亚洲演艺节吧，亚洲演艺节演的林登宇导演，你们都认识林登宇啊。华亮，黄家强、吴月娟，华亮已经去世了啊。黄家强、吴月娟，那么那时候林登宇导演跟我要求，得到我的同意，不要用这个台词，用我的故事，给那些演员做即兴表演。你要不要先讲这个？
Mr. Han is very happy to see that his play is now performed in English 20 years after he wrote it and after he was first staged at the Asia Theatre Festival. And the director then was, I think, a name that some of you might be familiar with, Lin Zhen. And among the actors was also this famous comedian that those of you who are older will remember, Hua Liang, who really brought the performance to life. Unfortunately, he's passed away already. And then the director Zhen asked Mr. Han whether he could just use the story but not the dialogue, not the script.
好，所以3个演员他们的即兴表演啊，进行到差不多1个月左右，他们都很痛苦，因为要自己出台词啊，自己讲自己的一些话，然后一个故事给他们自己碰撞，然后在地上打滚。我知道花亮是最痛苦的，因为他是很能够表演的演员，但是他也觉得很痛苦。那么他们3个人就来跟我讲，要不要跟导演说用回我的剧本，用回我的那些台词？我说你不可以叫我来要求导演，应该是导演自己决定要不要。最后导演决定还是让我们即兴到完了。 所以整个戏跟我的这个剧本完全不一样，所以刚才我说我特别高兴，我的原来剧本啊，今天有几个非常出色的演员呈现出来。那么在那个演出完以后啊，我们的好朋友们大家都认识的宝坤啊，他跑来问我，他说为什么这样短？我没有话讲。 演员没有东西出来就是很短。
So the whole process at that time was just to take the framework of the story and for the actors to improvise and come up with their own lines. And they faced great problems with that, especially Hua Liang, who was a very seasoned television performer, but in this case he had a lot of problems. And what they did was at the end, after a few months, they asked the director to go and ask the playwright, to ask the playwright to request the director, can we go back to using your script that you've written? And of course, Mr. Han declined, said this is the decision of the director and you should abide by it. So in the end, what came out was completely different from what Mr. Han wrote, except for the general outline. And so tonight he's especially happy to see such an outstanding cast bring it to life. He raised a small anecdote of how Ko Bao Kun, after the first performance 20 years ago, came to him and asked him why was his play so short. And he had no way to reply this, because if the performers couldn't come up with the lines, then of course it would be short.
当然我要讲一个背景，就是当时宝坤曾经请台湾的刘敬敏来导演那个《傻姑娘快老树》啊。那么刘敬敏用他们的方法，就是跟宝坤说：“我用你的故事啊，然后我来给演员全部即兴表演。”啊，宝坤当然是 OK 啊，然后让他去实验，所以一个实验的一个《傻姑娘快老树》。最后宝坤自己再排多一次他自己的《傻姑娘快老树》，但是我自己没有办法排我自己的《福尔苏要的民谣》，非常谢谢你们，让我这个戏得到重生。
So,
谢谢谢谢。
Well, at that time, Ko Bao Kun also did a staging of his play called The Silly Girl and the Tree. The Silly Girl and the Funny Old Tree. And it was staged by this Taiwanese, very avant-garde director, Liu Jingmin. And when she came, and she used a very experimental approach, quite similar to this. But the difference between that staging and Zhen staging of Floating 101 is that in this, Ko Bao Kun had the chance to rehearse with the cast. So that was what happened. Okay, now maybe we can open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions, or even to the cast? Anyone would like to share? I mean, just now, because maybe we can revisit some of the questions. Did anyone sense that this was a translation when you watched it? Because evidently, I think especially. I was sitting there sensing the moods, and it seems that everyone was. Both plays resonated in different ways with the audience, right? Which is again fairly amazing when you think that it spans both 20 years and it spans language and culture. Were there parts that stood out for you in terms of how you identified with it, or how it seemed artificial? Because it could go either way though. Maybe certain parts were artificial, certain parts were very natural. Does anyone have something to share in this regard? Okay, then perfect, because now I want a chance to ask the director. Because I read both plays in Chinese, right? And the original Chinese versions of both were, they had always had that little, it's called epilogue, right, at the end, or how they presented the ending part. And in this case, I think both the epilogues were truncated or were completely removed. Was that a conscious decision that was it a collective decision by cast and director, or was there some logistics or censorship decision or something to not to have that?
I would say it's a collective decision, because I think in general this entire show was very much created as a collective, I think that we made decisions and we saw things and we all changed it and figured it out together. And that's kind of what made this process really fun. So for the last bit, we'll start with we'll start with Siren's piece. I think it's a challenging piece because actually the refugee comes back and rapes the corpse and then eats it. So I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to leave that in, and I didn't, and I decided that maybe not. Partially because we were trying to figure out what we could do. There was a lot of decisions that we made in the process of how violent we wanted to be, because as you can imagine, there was quite a certain level of violence that you saw, but already it was very, very pared down because she's supposed to have removed a bone from the body. So I was imagining, to remove a single bone from a human body, you actually have to really go at it, for a while, and then after rip it out, and then you have to dislodge it. So I realized it took a bit of an effort, so I decided that maybe what Siren was trying to go for was probably the soul or the core of the person, and so that's how we went with the light thing. And so then it was unnecessary for, I felt, for the refugee to finally come back and rape the corpse and, you know, remove the bones and, you know, all that kind of thing. So that was sort of the way I thought it could work better. And finally, I guess for like Float House 101, I think we all struggled with the ending. I think in the original script, Red comes back, and then she comes back and she says this most exciting thing, and she points to Blue and basically says that Blue was a writer, right? He was a writer, and then and he actually
was going to write about what happened in Float House, that they were withdrawn without a permission.
Yes.
Yeah, and then she reveals that Mr. Green was a reporter who was going to expose them, so he was put in this place, and that's how he became mad. He was attacked, and that's how he became paralyzed.
Yes. So there was a whole suggestion that, you know, like the lot of the three of them were particularly subversive people. So we went on, you know, our own journey to try to figure out what this meant for us. And you know, we came out with a lot of amazing conspiracy theories. It's like, what happened? Like, Float House isn't real, you know, and often these were just like three, like, Matrix, right? Like 3 people just locked into this vessel that, you know, that the corporation didn't want interfering with their affairs or interfering with the public. And so they just locked them and give them this feeling that, you know, they had to forget their past. There was no sense of time passing, and they were just locked there like indefinitely, and they just thought they could never leave. So that was initially one of our ideas in the process, and we really wanted to capture the whole dun dun dun, this is what happened in the end. But however way we tried to put it, it just felt like one of those amazing cop-outs. You know, in those movies like It Was a Dream, it really felt that way. We tried so hard to try to make it work because we liked it so much. You know, these 3 subversive people were, you know, fucking everything up, and I'm so sorry. And then like, so sorry. Oh my God, it's being recorded. They were really screwing everything up, and then they were like, and then they were locked away. So, but then yeah, it was just we tried so many different ways of doing it, and we just felt that by doing this, it would just in the moment decision. So yeah, that was I think what we came down to. Any other like suggestions, guys? I mean, like we were there and, you know, we're trying to figure it out. And
I had this theory that the whole world was run by androids.
yes,
Like, and they were the last 3 human beings on Earth. So
yeah, there were many amazing conspiracy theories. That was it.
Yeah, something interesting about doing this play, I mean, we're translating everything, but every rehearsal we changed a little something at very least.
Yeah.
Up until yesterday, we were still trying to find different things and move things around. So even today, it was a bit different from our test audience that we had yesterday. It's all very different. I think tomorrow will be very different as well.
And tweak it to make it better.
Yes, agreed. And to try to capture what both of you were intending to write.
It's almost like a 2-step translation process from the original source and in Jeremy's text, in which case, and then you translate it again.
Yes.
Because when I link it back, I see a process of stepping down. You know, it's very interesting. For Sirens one, he started. I mean, the original one in Chinese was about necrophilia. At the end, the actor mimes, you know, or screwing the corpse, right? And then Jeremy's version became eating the corpse, and then now in this version, it's a very different ending again. And I think the ending for Mr. Han's one, the Chinese one was less of a cop-out, because the Chinese one was, how do you pronounce the English word, denouement?
Oh, denouement.
Denouement, right? At the end, it tells you, you know, why it's like this, and as you go like, wow, it's like Sixth Sense, right? Because it actually, at the end, the story was actually Red comes back, if I remember correctly, and Red tells them this story about how she wanted to review. She was a whistleblower, so she wanted to tell the world what was happening with the Float House. Right? That was why she was there to do undercover secret research. Right? And after she told people the story of what happened on Float House, she told a newspaper reporter who killed himself, and then she told another intellectual or someone who went crazy, who went mad. And then you realize at the end that it was these 3 people. So they lost their memory and they came back here, and then they hear footsteps, or some very threatening footsteps coming, and then one of them, I think it was Mr. Green, said, "Oh, this is just the start." So you see a loop, a circle, right? So it's very a Pulp Fiction sort of thing. Yeah. And again, I can see it's really quite difficult not to to keep it as grounded and so that doesn't seem gimmicky. That one I do see. But I think the Chinese staging, at least when you read the text, it's less so of that. Yeah. You have anything to add on your endings, or what are your thoughts? Or does anyone have questions to ask? Because this is your chance, there's no director's cut DVD, so if you want to know why they wrote certain things or how they wrote it, this is your opportunity. Oh, yes.
Why did the two men write these two plays?
Yeah. That's a good question, because I was thinking back to 1995 and what was happening in Singapore then, because you want to, because now it seems that if you were to write these plays and stage it today, people would identify right away, right? And the PAB government might say, oh, they're writing these plays to criticize us for putting retirement villages in Malaysia and this and that. And just as I was sitting there, I was just thinking, it's funny because maybe it is, it's just a theory, like my hypothesis that certain segments of the Chinese community, especially the Chinese intellectual community, I think some may feel marginalized, right, because of larger developments. And when, let's say, imagine a huge flat surface and when you're marginalized, people are pushed to the margin and this thing is traveling to time, it's always the margins that experience things first. And it comes into the text. But what struck me just now very strongly compared to the Chinese versions was the fact that I underestimated the writers. Because when I read their plays and when I watched their plays, I see it's what they call frame switching as opposed to code switching, right? I see it as, because it's in Chinese, and I perceive it and I experience it as a Chinese person. So everything that Siren writes, I will run through my mind. It's about the mother is the mother tongue, then it's about culture, it's about your loss of roots, your sense of that. Yeah.
So far away from what we
See, it's very Chinese, right? It's very Chinese, but we are conditioned. We just naturally perceive things that way. Like same thing for Mr. Han's one. It's this rootlessness and our culture and how it's the dominant culture is taking over. But then when I watched today, I sensed the universality of it already, right? So it wasn't that they wrote plays only in that aspect. It's because I perceive, or the audience perceives it in that aspect. I mean, you shift it to a different language and a different scenario, then suddenly it's so universal, then you realize, wow, they're really writing universal things. So the problem is with the audience, not with the writers. Anyone has that perception? Like that's why I kept on wondering. Yes, why they wrote? 为什么就问是。
我现在我回想20多年前不容易那时候我写了不少的科幻故事就是我们把科幻当作现代的神话，就是用高度夸张跟想象的一些方法来讲以后的事情，大概是100年后的或是几十年后，其实是反射今天的事情。所以我想有一天地球的哪一个国家或者哪一个角落，他的老人越来越多的时候怎么办？没有想到今天面对的新加坡这些问题老人这么多怎么办？所以要给这个建国一代的很多的那些好处不然他们老人也是很多票的老人越来越多，在日本也是这个问题我看到一个故事，这个刺激我写这个的，就是日本的一个地方老人要被他的儿子带到山上去然后丢在山上给野兽吃掉，就不会造成家里的负担。这是日本的一个故事。但是有一个妈妈呢，她一路走一路摘下一些那个叶子那个树枝，他儿子背他上山他一边走一边摘那树枝，摘到最后他儿子要把它丢下来的时候他妈妈说，刚才我摘那些树枝告诉你 回家的路，你下山前不会迷路。所以老人没有办法，他要面对最后的一天的时候，他还想到他的孩子。所以我想，我们有一天也要老了，也要走。我们怎么想到我们的孩子？所以我觉得写这个戏就告诉我们，如果哪一个机构啊，哪一个，不管世界上哪一个跨国的集团啊，想出这样的一个方法来，让老人拿他全部的钱在海上漂游，有一天你死了，那你就沉下去，这个东西他还拿回去，还可以去塞个。用来讲，有一些国家或者一些国家的机器啊，是怎么样利用老人这个问题来谋取他们的利益。我觉得当时我想要写这么一点来提醒我们啊，我们自己要照顾我们的老人，也要注意别人怎么样利用我们的老人。大概是这样。插话，对不起。
Well, Mr. Han at that time was writing a lot of science fiction, and actually when we were sitting together, he was telling me he was writing it for his children or for young people, and he was inspired by a particular story. Well, he was inspired by the thought of what would happen to all these old people, because a day will come when there will be too many old people in society, and indeed that's what we see today with the pioneer generation, all of which have votes that are valuable. But in particular, he was inspired by this story from Japan about how certain people were abandoning their parents in the wilds, so that they could be eaten up by the wildlife and not be a burden to the family. And there was a story about how, as a man that was carrying his old mother up to leave her to this fate, she would break the branches of trees along the way. And when he was about to abandon her, she told him, "I broke the branches so that you would find your way back and please don't get lost." So it made him think of how people sometimes could accept this fate, because at the end, ultimately, they would still be thinking about their children. And then he also thought about the role of, for example, MNCs, for example. Would they, because of their particular ethic, want to invent or make a machine that could benefit themselves by off the backs of these old people, taking all their money and sending them out to float on the oceans, and then when they die, to take back the vessel and to recycle them again. So he wrote this, well, not just as creative act, but also as a reminder for us to think about our old folks and our old people.
My play wasn't written that long ago. It was written in 2001 and first staged in 2002. That's about 12 years ago. And the text was specially written for director Jeff Chan, who was with The Necessary Stage. I was, struck by his directing. I don't know whether any one of you have seen any of his directing works. Yeah, of course. Especially something like BOTE, The Beginning of the End. It's marvelous. It's so exciting. And that was when I had an idea to write something for him to direct. And I believe that a play, a script, is only the first stage of creation. And I would love the director to bring it to another stage and surprise me, to bring the text beyond recognition. And I don't go to any of the rehearsals of my plays, never. So this is also the same for this production. This is the first time I saw the production, I saw the whole thing, and I told Elena I'm expecting to be surprised, to be shocked even. So that was how the play was started, and it's like a question for the director to answer, to respond. I write more prose than plays. San Wen, so it's more lyrical. So for this play, I deliberately use a more lyrical style with lots of images and put them all together. So this is also the first time that I heard someone interpret it as as response to mother tongue. a mother tongue issue. Maybe it's hidden somewhere in my, somewhere in my consciousness, and it appeared in a different guise. That's like what Freud said, the dream and the consciousness. I love to see other people interpreting, recreating the piece I have written. So I don't know whether I've answered your question.
We have one question.
Yeah, but the images are very powerful, but actually I don't find them very accessible. Perhaps you can share with us, what was going on in your mind when you create those images? Like, why necrophilia is really something that not many of us have
experience, yes, because I don't have experience. I just picked up some images, just like I watched a lot of movies, so the scenes go through my mind, different images, different setting, different characters. So there isn't a reason why I want to deal with such an issue or such an image. It's just that I put them all together and try to use a structure to contain all these images. And you don't ask me to to tell the reason behind the writing process. Yes, I'm also a reader after, or a member of the audience after I've put all these in words. Invisibility, I think, England is going to work it with, I can't remember which company. Is it ITI? Oh yeah, ITI, the Intercultural Theatre Institute.
Because I thought I might come in with a commercial advertising that if you like this play, then Invisibility you will definitely love, right?
No, it's very different.
Certain things, imagery, imagery is
imagery,
imagery is accepted. And then so that will be restaged. So keep an eye out for the Intercultural Theatre Institute performance. And I think Drama Box is also going to stage a new play by Mr. Han. That the entire play on crosstalk, 相声. So I think that will be very interesting. That's soon, right? In a few months. So 2015.
Actually, can I add to that? Was a very good question because we struggled with it as well. When we first got it, we looked at it and went like, it was very terrifying to look at the script and try to combat it. So for us as a group, we created a subconscious understanding of what was happening, so we can explain to you what we thought, which would probably be different from what Siren thought. So it would be fun to compare. So
So Casey's character is obviously in a very interesting subconscious space, right? So it's moment to moment to moment to moment. From our understanding from Siren, we actually got that we found out that it was about a boy responding to his mother's death. So there was a whole psychology playing out between there's 3 different monologues, and so the first one we call it air, and as you can see, there's so much imagery of violence towards women in these, and also a very kind of childish kind of violence, very almost lack of understanding of how complex a person is, and that thing was and that was a lot of the level of psychology that we were seeing. So we figured as much that there was this boy whose mother passed away, who had some unresolved issues with his mother, and some of it was expressed in a deep guilt about things, and sometimes it was sexual feelings that was repressed, and the guilt came back again, and things to sort of accept and fight with in his mind about how he felt with himself, his mother, and the world around him. And so that's how we saw that character psychology. Okay, now, what's with the refugee? So the refugee, for us, I think we saw it as, in some ways, also the mother character. That the mother was always finding something, she's always in search, she had a lover and she's looking for love, she met a hermit, she was looking for wisdom, couldn't get it, and she was looking for all these different things, but never ever finding what she needed because the hunger was insatiable. So we kind of, for us anyway, figured as much that there was this boy with this mother issue because the mother was on a perpetual search. Like she was finding something, happiness, something or rather, but she was never going to get it. And if you're ever in a relationship like, I don't know, parent-child, partner or whatever, if one of the partner or one of the people is always in search for something, well, the other person sort of has this weird backlash of the residue of that relationship. And so that's what we were trying to explore. I know it doesn't come out that clearly, but it's all subconscious basis. So we battled with it, I guess as best as we could, yeah. But I think that was how we tried to make sense of it our way. Yeah.
Okay, one last pressing question, and then we'll call it night. Yes.
I've got a question about translation and the process of translation because we've got the playwrights who wrote in the Mandarin version, and then we've got the people who created the final product. But Jeremy was the one who translated it from Mandarin to English, and inevitably there is definitely some betrayal from the original text in that process. So that bit is not being represented here. So I'm quite curious to find out how you worked with whether you guys referred to the original Mandarin version if you could or something, or whether and for someone who's read both Mandarin and watched the English versions, if you imagine whether it would be really, really different if you had it in Mandarin staged with English subtitles versus staging Jeremy's version in English. Like, how different would it be? Yeah, sorry, that's like a lot of questions.
Good question.
Anyone in the cast or anyone else?
I think I entered the process quite late, but what I understood about what Elena was trying to do and what Jeremy was trying to do was not necessarily do a faithful version, but something that was in the spirit of what the writers were doing, and in terms of what the modern times were about too. So I don't think faithfulness and sticking to what the script exactly was literally was the intention anyway in the first place, So I hope that answers some of your questions as far as I know what our process was, but I don't know if Lena wants to add to that. No, really? Yeah.
Not really. We pretty much tried to look at what we thought the soul of the play was and just go with that because we knew things was going to be lost or things would be taken differently. So we just embraced it. It's a translation. It will be what it is, and it will be. You can't fight it, lah. Can't fight it.
I think we were given a lot of license by both the writers as well to say take it where you want to take it. So that was very generous. Thank you.
Okay, so on that note, please join me in thanking cast director.